All right, Nicole, thank you for joining us for the ACUOI RA training course. I'm happy to have you again. I'm Brandon Burley. I'm the Director of Residential Education at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And over the past few years, I've been working with ACUOI on their professional training series for creating and developing and assessing effective RA training course. So would you mind introducing yourself to everyone, and then we'll go ahead and ask you a few questions.
Sure. Well, my name is Nicole Giglia. I currently am a complex director and coordinator for training and development here at Providence College in Rhode Island.
Great, great. So coordinating RA training is a very difficult task, difficult to get a lot of stakeholders on board. And one thing we talk about in the course is really reaching out to lots of different departments to really see what they need from our student staff so that we can train them appropriately. So in your time at your institution, as well as maybe in professional experiences before, student experiences before, how do you feel training, RA training, the way we approach RA training has changed?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when I was an RA, I remember being in one room almost all day with the entire group and sitting there lecture style and, of course, fidgeting the entire time. So what I've seen change over the last few years is really focusing on small group activities and breaking everybody up and keeping them moving, whether it's round robin style or just moving in the same room, depending on your space needs, of course. And I think that has had a huge effect on the way our RAs really take away from training, and they're able to pay attention better and keeps them engaged. Other ways I've seen it change, I think really trying to get more RA participation as far as presenting and empowering those RAs that we rely on throughout the year to kind of teach their peers. And also, not only teaching them, but keeping them accountable throughout the entire training, especially in the summer when it's 2 weeks long, keeping them engaged by doing icebreakers or just having a peer system, role modeling system, almost like a mentor setup, and learning from each other. I think that's something we've really tried to incorporate, and not to take the weight off of us, but we find it more effective when they're learning from their peers.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any good examples of times where their peers have maybe taught a session or facilitated a session?
Yeah, I think one of the best sessions I've seen taught by a returning RA is roommate mediations, because I think and conflict management, those are two separate ones, but I think that's probably one of the biggest places where we see anxiety in new RAs, and hearing from the returners that it's not that hard. Here's a really great system that's worked for me. Here's some really great anecdotes. I think those are the ones they take the most away from.
Okay, great. So what I liked your idea of saying, being in one room all day is really torturous to the students who are there. How do you incorporate some creative approaches to your RA training program?
We've incorporated a lot of round robin sessions, and while sometimes that means that we're presenting 3 or 4 times, the small group, we tend to find that RAs have more opportunity to ask questions. It's not always your same, usual suspects that are raising their hands to offer the examples and the questions. So we do a lot of breakout groups. We also, at the same time, we want to make sure that all the information that they're getting is consistent. So even when someone asks a question in a large group, that's helpful for all of them to hear, because they might not ask that in a smaller group. So on the flip side of the small groups, we do our counseling skills session as almost like a behind closed doors, where we do a skit on a stage, and it's presented by our professional staff. They're the actors. We have counseling staff in the room who sits in the small groups throughout this larger area, and they debrief it in a small group, and then we debrief it as a large group.
Okay. How do you, I think one thing that our RA training course tries to implement are different ways to evaluate that the training we've done, the training we've facilitated is effective. So whether that's in the form of, one other participant talked about providing a behind closed doors at the beginning of training and another behind closed doors at the end, and really showing the staff member how they've grown over that period of time, and we're able to assess, did we teach the right policies, the right procedures. How do you try to incorporate a assessment or evaluation of the effectiveness of the training, and whether the students have captured and are holding on to the skills that you've taught them?
Well, before we even start talking about training as far as what we're going to do and when we're going to do it, we develop a set of learning outcomes. And what we've started doing this year is including the learning outcomes on their schedules. So they come in knowing exactly what they should be learning. So we hope that kind of frames their mind for the next 2 weeks, and have more assessment and evaluation in the moment. But after training, we also send out a Google form that has it's like a survey with all of, we have some satisfaction questions as far as how did you like the food, how did you like the activities that we did, but then we also include questions that hit all of our learning outcomes. So those essentially become our assessment at the end. And we were able to see this year really what they took away from and what they didn't. For example, instead of inviting all of our campus departments in for one session for 15 minutes or 20 minutes to explain who they are, we did a campus fair. And so they just went around. It was almost a traveling ice cream social. So every department had their own topping. And we found that that worked really well for them to kind of take away from a lot of departments what they do, where students can go for those resources, but not all of them. And we saw which ones weren't effective in that setting.
Okay. Great. So I think over time, I think the last 6 or 7 years, we have seen a lot of institutions, presenting at NASPA and ACUOI and different conferences about pushing some training either online in order to cut down training during that 2-week window where things get crazy. We've also talked about RA training courses that occur while either before an RA is employed or selected, or after, and kind of ongoing training. What are some things that you've thought about or considered for pre-employment or ongoing training, such as in-services?
I've seen it evolve quite a bit. I've seen it where you bring in new staff before the returning staff in the summer. I know that we have tried, and it wasn't the most successful system for our web training over the summer. And I think that would be great if we had a really good accountability system to go with that, to make sure that they're doing it when they get back in the fall. I think what I've seen work really well is spring training. In the past, they've done a May training for a few days. They'd gather all the new hires and all the returners together. But it was coincided with a lot of times that other groups were doing their May training. So what we're looking at this year is doing a 2-part orientation. 2 days, maybe 2 to 3 hours each, just to kind of get them acquainted and not teach them those heavy skills because they do sort of lose it over the summer, but just more orienting them and really getting them to know the department and each other.
Okay, great. And so you brought this up earlier. You said, the one room death by PowerPoint. So what are some ways that you incorporate maybe learning styles, different learning styles, different learning or different teaching skills of your presenters, classroom pedagogy? You mentioned the round robins and active conversations, but how are you maybe shifting or thinking about training not just as going over policies and procedures, but really an educational opportunity? How are you incorporating educational theory or educational models and skills in your training?
So I am a huge visual learner, and I need to do things with my hands, so I really try to bring that into RA training. So, for example, when we present on community building and programming, what I have my staff do, my hall director staff, is I want them to do a program during RA training. And it could be something that they're already presenting on, but in the style of a program. So they have to advertise for it, they have to put it on, they have to set it up, and sort of role model for the RAs exactly what they do to do a program. And then sometimes we don't quite get here with time, but I also want the RAs during that time, to the returners especially, to also put on a program with new staff and kind of walk them through that, and almost like a practice run. So just kind of find different ways, because when words are up on a PowerPoint, I know it kind of loses a little bit, and even in smaller groups. So hands-on, interactive, as much as possible.
Okay, Great. Are there any words of wisdoms you would share with a new professional who maybe is just taking on RA training for the first time? Any words of wisdom that you would share?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to propose something new. I think it's really easy to get stuck in what we did last year because it's always a time crunch right before RA training to kind of get everything done. But somehow it always magically does get done. So don't be afraid to think out of the box a little bit, and it could be a disaster, but it could be the greatest thing, the best change that they've seen in a while. So just don't be afraid to do that.
Great. All right. I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thanks for participating.
Thank you.